Hi, everybody. Welcome and a big thank you for everyone for joining us for this evening's webinar, Anti-oppressive and non-hierarchical practices for arts organizations, co-presented with Articule. My name is Nick Maturo. I'm a project manager at ELAN working on our Quebec Relations project. Quebec Relations is an ELAN project that is first and foremost about helping artists and arts organizations access funding and other key resources offered by the government of Quebec. So we offer things like webinars, such as this one, obviously, but we also have a searchable funding platform for Quebec grants on our website. You can see the URL on your screen. We also offer funding consultations, free grant assistance for any provincial grant programs in Quebec, as well as other forms of support for arts and cultural organizations and artists. So if you're interested in learning more, my email address is on the screen now. I'm going to put it in the chat momentarily. You also have it from me sending out the Zoom link earlier. So please do get in touch. I'd love to hear from you. But I don't want to spend too much more time on that. We want to get right into the main topic for tonight. So we're going to start discussing anti-oppressive and non-hierarchical practices for arts organizations. Just as a point of clarification, because I know there was some confusion, ELAN itself does not actually operate on an explicitly non-hierarchical model, but we are really excited to be able to invite representatives of an organization that does to share their experience with you. So that is enough of me talking. I'm going to hand things over to Aziza now, who is Articule's outreach coordinator, to lead you through this evening's presentation.
Thank you so much, Nick. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for participating to the event. Thanks to our speakers as well, and Francisco Gonzalez Rosas, who helped us organize this event. Before we start, I would also like to thank my colleague and administrative coordinator at Articule, Morial for helping organizing this event before I came into this position. So many thanks to everyone. Before we continue, I would like to start the conversation by acknowledging that Articule Artist Run Center is located in Jojage, also known as Munyang, which is the Anishinaabe name given by the Algonquin and also known colonially as Montreal. Articule is located on the unceded territory of the Ganyangayaga Nation as custodians of the lands and water on which we gather today. As a Moroccan settler, I give thanks to both these lands and water to be able to live and grow here. You may know this already, but Articule is starting a new chapter at the location of our new gallery on Saint-Hubert Street. We are very grateful to get to know our community a bit better and start building a relationship with our Artist Run Center, Daphne, which is located a couple of minutes away from us. Daphne is an Indigenous run center committed to serving the needs of emerging artists and mid-career Indigenous artists. The center is currently presenting the work of Suzanne Morissette with the exhibition Translations, and we invite you to visit the space and get to know the center and the programming. So let me just start by sharing the screen. It'll take a couple of seconds. I'm not used to this so far. All right, so Articule is an open access artist run center dedicated to the presentation of a broad range of contemporary art practices through our various programming channels. We strive for artistic excellence, interdisciplinarity, and social engagement. While special consideration is given to emerging artists, we also respect those who have already established important precedents, who continue to test the limit of aesthetic gesture and who commit themselves to the ideals of experimentation and risk-taking. Articule supports discursive and alternative activities that promote dialogue and build network with local, national, and international artists, collectives, and organizations. Our open structure encourages the direct participation of an active and diverse membership on both programming and organizational levels. When Articule was founded in 1979, the founding members shared the common values that remain to this day central to the operations. So these values are bilingualism, collaboration, and participative management. In addition to maintaining this mode of governance as an engaged and creative space, Articule offers programming that is political, critical, flexible, and diverse. Not too long ago, so 11 years ago, the staff and members started a process to become more inclusive and diverse in terms of the membership, the staffing, and programming. That led to the foundation of a committee that's called the Fabulous Committee. That's still under the wing of outreach to this day. Articule committed to, with the help of this committee, to work toward becoming a center rooted in anti-oppressive and decolonial practices. 2 years later, the center held its first edition of Morial Monochrome. I don't have much to say on it yet. I think I will let our speakers discuss this event, as I'm very new to Articule and also I want to learn more about the event. It's a conference aimed at addressing the myths and underrepresentation and systemic oppression of marginalized groups in our contemporary art milieu. So through the years, it grew into a multi-day interdisciplinary gathering and became the center's annual flagship event. With the events that we had these last couple of years, of course, we couldn't get this event in public, but we're hoping to have it very soon. In 2015, the center then started working on an anti-oppression and conflict resolution policy that was to research and define the context in which oppression grows. So this policy was viewed as a guide on our principles and values, leading a cultural shift inside of our organization. So this was, after the Fabulous Committee, one of the starting points on these questions. The document grew with the feedback from, of course, the committee, our members, and also a lot of external resources. It aimed to encompass any other policy that exists within Articule, so that would include HR, the anti-harassment policy, and also our main general policy. After this, these first discussions were open, well, a few years later, Articule really came up with this document that we called the basis of unity. I already skipped one of the slides. There we go. So in 2018, we have the basis of unity, which was adopted by the board and our members. So what was the anti-oppression policy became this document, which is a list of values that lives alongside our mandate and guides the development of both programming and our policy at the center. To this day, Articule is working on facilitating dialogues, exchanges, and accessibility for QT BIPOC, queer, trans, indigenous, Black, and people of color. We are still invested in decolonizing its space through its programming, language, and politics. Any new opportunity, partnership, or special project is reviewed through this lens. This document, which is available on our website, is not legally binding. It's really presented as an introduction to a center to every new member. So it's written in French, English, and in Ghanaian language of the Mohawk, and it's visible really on all of our communications. It was made to use non-academic language and aims to be accessible to any participant. Really, every time we have a new activity or event or partnership coming in, we have to question ourselves and see if it really fits this document representing our values. So this document is really an ongoing participation between our public, members, staff, and the board of directors. We aim to make it available, and all the resources that were used during the foundation of this document to make it accessible in our center. And we welcome regularly the feedback to check its relevance today and inclusivity, and to ensure the constant development of these values. So I already spoke too much, and I started very recently at Articule. So I want to give this time to our speakers to really explain their own personal experience and their work throughout these initiatives. So first with the Fabulous Committee, and then with working on policies, and then what became the basis of unity that we know today. So really, when I started, I discovered that the membership is really active and lively, and the members have an essential role in guiding Articule's voice and action. Let's not forget the many figures who were involved in the core team and our board throughout the years. They have helped us identify our blind spots and motivate us to this day in creating a safer and more inclusive space. I will present to you today Sophie, Samuel, Libby, and Fernando, who will be way more eloquent and way more knowledgeable about these initiatives. And I'm very excited to present to you. Sophie Lefato is a cultural organizer, facilitator, and editor who is currently working as a consultant in organizational health processes and conflict mediation. Back in the day, she completed degrees in environmental studies, medical anthropology, and archival science. For more than 15 years, her work has been about experimenting with tactics for fostering intersectional solidarities throughout anti-racist feminist organizing, publishing, and creating, especially in the artist-run world. With a multidisciplinary background, managing various projects in the grassroots community, nonprofit, academic, public, as well as private sectors, she tends to think about social change through an organizational and interpersonal lens. As a co-founder of the Transdisciplinary Artivistic Collective, and in all of her different leadership roles, she aims to facilitate the emergence of a critical and creative culture rooted in social justice. Sophie is second generation Vietnamese and grew up in Jojage, Muniang, Montreal, and its suburbs. She was outreach coordinator at Articule from 2013 to 2017 and co-organized, amongst other, 3 editions of Morial Monochrome with the Fabulous Committee, which also authored Articule's Basis of Unity during that period. We have Samuel, I go too fast, Samuel, who will participate to the conversation with Sophie. Samuel Garrigo Mesa is an artist, writer, and gallery technician. He has been involved with Articule for 12 years, participating as board member, president, and original member of the Fabulous Committee. He's now also employee temporarily at Articule. Lili Shi is an independent art administrator working with artists and arts organizations in Quebec and Ontario. Since 2007, she has played an active role in artist-run centers in Montreal, organizing art festivals, collaborating with artists, and contributing to art projects. With a background in nonprofit governance and organizational development, she has been instrumental in implementing care and equity agendas in the organization which she has worked. And finally, Fernando. Fernando is a Bisha queer and multidisciplinary artist coming from a context of cultural diversity. Fern's artistic practice is strongly expressed through the life experiences as a neurodiscordant individual and survivor of domestic violence. Fern's art is a reaction to the massifying and dehumanizing power of capitalism and aims to reframe everyday's object towards a contra-colonial and anti-fascist struggle. Fern is currently involved in collaborating research on the Paz-Joapa, a subversive, heavily codified dialect spoken amongst dissidents who are geographically located in the stolen territory known as Brazil. In Jojage, Fern has been elected as a member of the board of directors at the newest local artist fund center, the DC Arts Interdisciplinaire, which is dedicated to the self-management of capacity and diversity. Witness of significant changes in the local art scene and a member of Articule since a long time, firmly contributed to the discussions that have been brought to the Fabulous Committee at Articule. So of course, we'll start the conversation, but please make sure to add your questions to the documents. And if we see the need, we'll try to answer them as they go, but we'll save some time at the end of the conversation to answer you. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Sophie. I'm gonna be, I don't know if Samuel, you still want to do a conversation together. But first, I just wanted to say thank you, Aziza, for the intro, but also for your support in organizing this event. You're doing a stellar job, and I hope you don't minimize your role in all this. Sorry, it's my auntie moment. I mean, Samuel, you can jump in if you want, but I wanted to...
I'll let you get started before I can jump in.
Well, you're the senior. But I
Calling me old? Yeah.
I wanted to, I guess, like frame a little bit also my contribution, you know, as someone who's not been around for a few years now. So I was at Articule for about 4 years, and starting in 2013. And yeah, I just wanted to be able to name that that period was at once beautiful and difficult and traumatizing. And it's a gift to be able to say that today, and to say it with in a way that's not paralyzing, and in a way that is full of gratitude. Also wanting to give ourselves permission to, in French we say divaguer, which is a word I really like, which is not necessarily about being vague, but I actually tend to be vague too, but about waves. So that also has to do with being vague, and like obviously there a lot of stuff happens, so we'll only get a few fragments and impulsions today. And that's why also I think Samuel and I wanted it to be more of a conversation that's organic. I won't be teaching anything, and I want to be in a position where I don't want to have things that I want to say, you know, that I want you to understand. Yeah, I don't know. Already starting to ramble.
Well, I had a few things not prepared, just a few ideas that I jotted down in relationship to this, because I feel like I've been around the center through about 5 or 6 different stages of change, of significant change, that have transformed it from the time I arrived to now. And yeah, it's about 11, 12 years that I've been with the center. I don't know why I stick around. Everybody else left. The very first time I arrived at Articule, I had been in Montreal for about a year at that time, or maybe just like 5 or 6 months. And I can't remember, like, you know, the farther things go back, the foggier they are for me. And I think I was planning on applying for a show at Articule. And that's why I decided to go to the gallery, you know, the next available event, and just check out what was going on. And it happened to be at the time, Articule had a series called Soup and Something. And each one of these soups was the so-called like gatherings in which a local restaurant donated soup. and one of the members did a presentation on a topic that they were interested in. So the very first soup I went to was called Soup and Sex. And a member of Articule was doing kind of like a presentation about this kind of like this sidetrack to their research, and happened to involve male, masculinity and sexuality a lot. So she wanted to present this. She wanted to present like this extra bit of research that she that was coming up that wasn't really part of her thesis or whatever. I didn't know it at the time. I thought the presentation was quirky, a little bit odd, not that insightful, but I don't know. Anyway, whatever. I didn't think too much about it. It was okay. And then years later, and I feel like there's a way that things operate at Articule too. There's so much that happens behind the scenes that you don't see right away. Years later, I realized that this event was like really controversial, that a lot of people were offended by the presentation. And, in retrospect, I was like, well, yeah, it was a bit about fetishizing men of color. There was a big, there was something that had to be done. People were offended, and they talked to the staff, and the staff had to deal with it. But nobody wanted to deal with it directly. Nobody wanted to deal with it, to be confrontational with the artist, with the presenter, right? So the way I've heard the story is that different approaches were tried, all of them indirect and not able to like put their finger on precisely what it was that had bothered people about the presentation. And then it just got bigger and bigger. Like the problem got bigger because nobody wanted to name it. At that time, I remember I met Coco, who was one of the founding members of the Fabulous Committee. And I met Denis. Oh, what's his last name? I can't remember. Anyway, but he was another member. He was the archivist for Articule for a bit.
Denis Lessard.
Oui, c'est ça. And they were very welcoming, both of them. And they said, hey, become a member. And I was like, okay, yeah, sure, you guys are friendly. And that's how my journey at Articule started. Coco was actually, anyway, I can jump into like the next little bit right away. Coco was I feel like was the drive behind the Fabulous Committee, behind the formation of the Fabulous Committee. And it happened that the staff and some of the members had gone to an anti-oppression workshop by Coco. It's not Coco, it's Coco, yeah. What does it stand for?
The Center for Community Organizations.
Right, where you work now, yeah. Circles. So they went to a workshop, an anti-oppression workshop, and the part of what came out of it is like, we got to create a committee that is about anti-oppression and deal with involuntary sort of oppressive practices that organizations, you end up mimicking general society. And it seemed like, I don't know precisely why Coco was so driven to do this, and it doesn't matter, I guess. But they were like really, really into it. And the very first meeting, I remember we had it like on the steps of the old Articule on Fairmount. And it was just three of us. It was me, Monique, who was the administrative coordinator at the time, and Coco. And that was it. And I can't remember if I think I was on the board. at the time already, and I must have been, and I didn't want to join. I hadn't joined a committee yet, and you have to if you're on the board to join a committee. So they, one was in some ways, one was created right at the right moment, and that I could join and participate. And nothing happened with the committee for like a year. Like very little happened. We had very hard time attracting membership. What ended up as the primary. I feel like for a long time I was the only non-white member of the committee, of the Fabulous Committee, and we purposely, and Coco again pushed for this. Purposely not naming it the Anti-oppression Committee. We're like, anti-oppression sounds so drab, and no one wants to do that. So we just we went with Fabulous, yeah, instead. The majority of the work during the first year was basically telling the rest of Articule at every meeting that we existed, that the Fabulous Committee existed, and that what we wanted to do, like the very narrow goal that we had set for ourselves, was that we wanted Articule, that we wanted the membership of Articule to represent the makeup of the city of Montreal. And I think we had like the 2006 census was like the latest one at the time. And it was like close to like 30% of Montrealers self-identified as, and there's the language that the census uses, belonging to a visual minority. And we're like, well, there's like, I think the membership was probably close to 40 people, probably a little bit more than 40 people. And we had maybe 3 or 4 non-white people. So it was like, like it was really out of balance. Like the social makeup of the city was not reflected in the social makeup of the membership. So we wanted to change that. And we got a lot of, like at the time I wasn't thinking, yeah, the membership of Articule is like really older white people. But that's who it was, more established artists. I think there were some people who were back then in the position that I am now, where they had been with the center for like a decade or more. And there was a lot of resistance because we were putting the focus on something other than art. Right. So people were like, some people were less embarrassed about voicing their opposition. Others less so. Others were a little bit more open about it, and that was handy because you want to know. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. What else can I say?
Well, I mean, maybe I can jump in because, like, you started talking about your first contact with articule as a moment of confusion, if I understand well,
Mm-hmm.
and that resonates with me also my experience. So I think that's interesting as like confusion as an element of of change.
Mm-hmm.
And accepting and embracing confusion, and as a I guess a potent space, because when I was hired as outreach coordinator, I understood that my one of my mandates, or one of the main reasons that I was hired, was because I cared a lot about these questions of diversity, inclusion, equity, etc.
Mm-hmm.
and I put a lot of energy into it, and then I was like confused because some people were like not so into it. I'm like, what? Like, what do you want? This is, like, this is how it's done. And I mean,
We had a perfectly good, mostly white center, right? And people were like, why are you trying to change this?
Yeah, it's like this, because I went back to this presentation that I gave at the Hamilton Artists Inc. At the end of my 4 years. They wanted to know more about like like today, like what did articule do? How did you do it? And yeah, at the time I called, I'm just gonna show a visual just for fun to change it up. So yeah, this is like 2017. Sorry for the retro look. Like I was really obsessed by the end of like my tenure or whatever, about this idea of diversity. Like I wanted to problematize that, because it's just something like it's taken for granted by the people in power, right? Like, oh, we want to diversify the space. And so like, and in my work today, I get asked that a lot. So like, how do you do that without tokenizing? Like, in other words, like, how do you, not just sprinkle a bit of pepper, but make the plate taste real good? And like, well, the answer is like, let the people of color cook. Let the indigenous people cook, because our food tastes really good. That is like, if you can't have a discussion about diversity without having a discussion about power, basically. And so that's why there's resistance, right? Because there's like a confusion from the people who have the greatest intentions, and I'm not accusing anyone. I think it's normal. To It's scary to share power, to lose power, and so like, yeah, sometimes like it doesn't have to be a perfectly harmonious process. Like, I was talking to a colleague yesterday, and she was like, oh yeah, this organization really wants to work on an anti-racism policy, but I don't think that's the answer to their conflict. And I was like, well, it's not. Like, words are not gonna make people talk to each other necessarily.
Right.
But at least it does create a context for conversations, or for things to move, and things to,
Right.
and it doesn't need to look nice. Like, it won't look nice.
Yeah. I think this is one of the things that like really, what we really thought about at the time. It's that, it was already in vogue to create inclusivity statement. And so like every center, every organization was inclusive, whatever. But we were like really keen. It's like, well, we don't just want to be inclusive. We want to actually change the makeup of who is in the center, who is participating, because anyone can write this passive inclusivity statement. We wanted to actually be a living something, like effectual change, not just a vague hope on our website.
And I mean, it took many things and events before we got to even the idea of having a policy. I think it was an accumulation, a repetition of events that were like, what can we do about that? What can we do to prevent this from happening over and over? And so I wanted to maybe share, like, obviously about the Fabulous Committee. The Fabulous Committee was a space really to hold a lot of those reflections, but also a lot of action, experimentation, risk taking. So for me, also, there was that confusion when people were like, well, we're taking away energy from art. Well, I mean, what do you mean? Like, we're for me, like, it was like, we're living this mandate. We are actually, like, honoring this mandate. And so that, yeah, like, I wanted to say, you know, that in that time, because there was this idea of, yeah, we want to change, and because I was like, okay, I'm on board, and because also there was this resistance at the same time, there was a lot of energy. There was like uh, it was like the golden age of the Fabulous Community. Like, at some point,
Yeah, we had like 20 members,
yeah,
more. Yeah.
I had a picture of this. We had a barbecue. Like, when I say we were cooking, it's not just metaphorical. There were a lot of moments where we shared food and cooked. And this was also, like, in terms of programming, different kinds of event. There was table setting. There was actually that theme of so in the backyard, barbecue with the Fabulous Committee. And this was one of the editions of Morial Monochrome. I lost my train of thought. What was I saying? Oh yeah, Fabulous Committee. And I guess, like, yeah, I wanted to talk about Fabulous Committee, but also Morial Monochrome as kind of a symptom, like a byproduct of this energy, because before I arrived, there was it was a panel, and then when I started, we did another panel, and then there was like a momentum that was built with that, and then I think that, like, this edition afterwards was a whole day conference that we did actually at the MAC. And in both of those instances, it was interesting because, like, we realized that I think we went outside of articule because we wanted some kind of neutral ground and wanted also other people to join the conversation. But as we is me and the Fabulous Committee, I think we realized that we were creating a method, a way of being. We were, like, creating a space of liberation where we're like, oh, we don't really want to go somewhere else because, like, actually sometimes the hospitality was so, and say, like, why don't we do it at articule? Why don't we, you know, show and welcome people at articule, because now we created this space that is inspiring. And so, like, that last edition that I co-organized with the committee was at articule. It was over many days, and for me, like, it's just a representation of, like, the space that people of color were taking in the center, and started infiltrating also other committees until it infiltrated, like, the programming committee. So, like, obviously there's different, like, levels of power different between different committees. So, like, having more people on the programming committee meant that there was going to be even more change, and, like, having people on the board meant that there was going to be much more change.
And the board went through, like, very difficult series of changes, has gone through many different iterations. And I feel like when I spoke earlier of, like, witnessing 5 or 6 different significant changes, I feel like a lot of it has to do with the makeup of the board and the way that it's progressed from who it was. Like, I remember being there and people feeling kind of entitled to participate on the board. The way it works, you can do, I think you're chosen for 2 years, and then you can do 2 mandates back to back. So for a total of 4 years, and then you must take some time off the board before serving again. And I feel like there were members of Articule who, just took it for granted that they would serve their 4 years, take a year off, and then serve some more time on the board, right? So it was very, very established. That routine was super established. So the threat posed by the Fabulous Committee was like palpable. Maybe they couldn't, or many of them could not verbalize it precisely in those terms, but it was really a transfer of power that needed to happen. And which brings me a little bit to that non-hierarchical model that we supposedly have. And I say supposedly very strongly, because I feel like from the moment I arrived, it was very much, from the moment I arrived on the board, that idea of it being non-hierarchical was like taking shape. And it was, I think Articule had gone through a consultation, created a 5-year plan, and did, about moving towards a non-hierarchical model. But serving on the board, I was like, no, there's a hierarchical model. We just don't want to acknowledge the hierarchy. And it was, it shifted back and forth and between the power that staff have and the power that the board has, and and various moments where staff wants to take the reins, and various moments where the boards want to take the reins, and various moments, very palpable moments, where the board was like, you can have that power back. Like afraid to use it, afraid to be the decision takers, afraid to be responsible. And this happened multiple times. I've witnessed it multiple times. I feel like as a younger member of the board, I was happy to, as somebody who was new to the board, I was happy to like let others take the lead the majority of the time. As I became, after like, I think I served 3 years on the board. By the 3rd year, I was like, I was able to speak a bit better, a bit more, be more vocal about how I felt about things. But we had like some tumultuous years, and I think that's, though not visible perhaps to the outside public all the time, that very much has something to do with the fact that we were actively inviting different people to participate. And like you look at Articule now, and I feel like the majority of our membership is people of color. And so is the majority of our staff, right? And yeah, the change from and this is why I joke, is like, why am I still around? Because everybody I knew from 12 years ago, I can't think of anyone from my original moment of stepping into Articule that is still there now.
Yeah, I also want to build on this because there was the Fabulous Committee as like sort of a powerhouse, but there was a staff too, as you mentioned, as like a space of change and experimentation. And I remember when you talking about the non-hierarchical model, at some point we, as staff, we were doing our best to be non-hierarchical, which wasn't easy. Like I think like part of what drove the change too is this synergy that we were able to create between, well, outreach and programming, like outreach not being instrumental to programming or just being a promotional hand or tool for programming, but like as a dialogue, as like yeah, like it's like caring about like who do we do this work for, but also synergy with admin, like so how do we organize, how do we use administrative processes to you know, empower the mandate, and so I guess like what I want to say is that there was the change in the membership, but it was also like the change in the staff that um, created a synergy between everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I see the time going. I don't know if you I wanted to speak to maybe like a few things that to led to the basis of unity, because we had started with that, and I said, well, there was a lot of stuff that happened before that. But so like I think maybe like it's a nice way to bring this together as like also a collaboration between staff and board and members, like this true yeah, some horizontality, because oh yeah, the thing I forgot to say is that like with the previous board, we realized at some point as staff that they thought that they were horizontal, but that between them and us it was not, and we were like,
right, yeah.
Again, confusion.
And this was one thing that happened, like, you know, like when you try to do something new, but you've been doing the old thing for so long that you can only frame the new thing in the old ways. So when I joined the board, like a lot of the talk was just how much responsibility the board had. And you know, should we get in the conversation every year was like, should we get board insurance in case something goes seriously wrong, right? So there was that kind of like, the staff are doing everything, but the board has all the responsibility. And anyway, I feel like it was a lot of unsettled things happening around that, and different boards having different ideas of like what their place on the hierarchy was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's widespread. I mean, like in my work today too, like I see there's so much confusion as to what the roles and responsibilities of a board member is.
Mm-hmm.
And so like again, very common and normal.
But I mean, like, yeah, we still have like this structure that's, you know, we have a president, we have a vice president, we have secretary of the board, and these titles sound, I don't know, important or whatever. And it really, like the culture, like of the board that you're coming into, like really influences how you behave in that space.
Definitely setting the tone.
Uh-huh.
I don't know why, but I think it's time to show a picture.
Sure, show a picture, and then I'll tell one more thing.
Okay, and then I'll say something else, and then we can go to a break.
Okay.
This is an anti-oppression training given by Coco to actually it was a general assembly. So I remember at Articule we have like so many general assemblies per year.
So
like most
many.
organizations have one.
Yeah, 3. Yeah.
Yeah, and so one of them, and this was in a period that was the communication was challenging. And so we invited Coco to give an anti-oppression training, just, you know, so that we maybe start to speak some common language. But anyway, and here like Kira Page, because I promised Aziza I would share some some tools. So like she's talking about the oppression tree. I'm just gonna put it in the chat real quick.
Yeah.
And I won't go into it, but like it's like a way to understand how oppression works as not as a systemic thing. And also like I wanted to show a picture of everybody being together, and wanted to speak to also like at the time how we came about the basis of unity was what was as I said like it was an initiative, like it was an initiative, like I created a box for it. I'm like I submitted it to the members of the Fair-Based community. I'm like, hey, you know, these are things are happening. Like, what do you think of like working on a thing to like prevent things from happening again? But then it became like totally like member driven as a process to put that together. And I just wanted to speak to like this idea of shared leadership, of like holding space for different kinds of leadership to express themselves, and like obviously like in a member driven center, like that's super key. And so like it was completely members, board members and non-board members who first they did a survey, anonymous survey, to understand like to do an evaluation and assessment of this situation, and based on that drafted first version. And yeah.
Anyway, I'm going to tell this story, but I feel like, anyway, just a little thing that I thought about too, that I considered mentioning. I remember at the end, and this is, you know, about how things have changed and how sometimes they don't, or they change and you end up with the same thing again. I remember at the end of, or we're coming towards the end. So one thing that happens at Articule is that the programming coordinator is given a 5-year term. And that's told to them at the time of hiring. And the philosophy behind it is to keep the center fresh, to not, you know, to keep the programming fresh, to have like a new perspective regularly, or, you know, with a certain timeline, and to not, in a sense, become like some other places, some other artist-run centers who, you know, grow to be, you know, they had the same staff for so long that that staff becomes like identified with the center in many ways. Not that that model is wrong, it's just like we wanted to do something different, right? So towards the end of the programming coordinator's term, when I was there, when I arrived, the board was not prepared. Everybody knew this was coming. Everybody knew that this was going to be a challenge. Everybody liked the programming coordinator who was there, Julie, and and the board was just like, you know what? Please stay. We're going to extend your mandate for an extra year. And then, you know, Julie quickly accepted, grateful, and then went off to do something else really soon afterwards. We were forced to look for a new programming coordinator very quickly. Anyway, I won't talk about that search. That's a whole other story. But 5 years later, we've been through a couple of different boards, and we arrived at the exact same moment somehow. The board knew that the programming coordinator had a 5-year term. They had known about it. You know, like Articule had always known about it. And we arrived at that moment unprepared again. And we did the exact same thing. Totally different group of people, totally different board. Many of them had no idea that this had happened already. And we did the exact same thing. We begged the programming coordinator, please stay another year. and they accepted, and then quickly moved on to do something different. Anyway, that was just like a funny, curious repetition of things, like things change, and then some things unwillingly stay the same.
Mhm. Well, it's funny because I also wanted to say something about repetition. And well, okay, it's a bit like, okay, all over the place, but like the part that you skip, not
Significant, yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think like I spoke to the power of being able to name, and I think like I think it's important today that we can name that a lot of the struggles happen around anti-Black racism at the center.
Yeah.
And so like the change in the staff again was a source of conflict, and the part that about repetition that I wanted to mention, and this is also like a tool that I wanted to share with folks, is a Coco tool called the Women of Color in the Workplace. Here, and it's like I went to a workshop where they workshopped that tool at the time, and it was so crazy how many women of color have experienced the exact same path, which is like you get hired as a token, and then you see weird things happening at the center, and then you're not listened to, you're not validated, and actually the people in power try to create like divisions between these alliances between the people of color, marginalized people, and then you burn out and you go away.
Yeah. And there's a level of micromanagement that happens that was not present just a few months earlier. And this is like, this is the board asserting their place in the hierarchy again. This is what happened. That all of a sudden, the board's reading the fine print and being like, in a way that they had never done before. And so anyway, that the supposed non-hierarchy, just like non-hierarchy for who? Yeah.
Exactly. On that note,
On that happy note.
well, I had like a few sort of like wrap up comments. Maybe it's useful to, so like just speaking about change in leadership. So it's very slow. So there was a change in leadership within staff. So being more horizontal, change in leadership between board and staff, which was supposed to be horizontal. Membership composition change, board composition change. So those things work together. And in there's like multiple actors. There's a staff, the members, but also artists. We didn't talk too much about artists, but the fact that we invited racialized artists into different kind of programming channels, and then them taking up space in the center, but also some of them becoming members. And then there's change in relationships. So between staff and board, I already said, between programming and outreach and admin, and ultimately between racialized and non-racialized artists.
Thanks for naming it, Sophie. The racism.
So I think we're done.
So, yeah, Sophie, should we move into a break period now?
I think
okay.
Up to Aziza, yeah.
Yeah, Aziza?
I think we're ready, yes. It was 10 minutes break for everyone, and then we come back to the Zoom. And then now let Libby speak. Thank you.
Okay, I guess it's 6:17 now, so people should be back or on their way back. So I will hand things back to the speakers to take it from here.
Yeah, we'll let Libby speak a bit on your experience. Libby, I forgot to mention in the bio, but was our administrative coordinator for a couple of years. So she really worked in the middle of all these changes to validate and really make them happen. So Libby, I'll let you speak on that.
Okay, thank you, Aziza. Hello, everybody. Yes, I worked at Articule actually for 5 years, from 2013 through the end of 2018. So yes, through a lot of the changes that Samuel and Sophie were talking about. I would like to just say a couple of things. So, but as the admin coordinator, I was an admin coordinator who didn't do any programming. Sometimes in organizations we have different roles, and admin personnel can be, involved with all kinds of programming initiatives. But I really was an admin person who worked with the board, finance and fundraising. All the staff work with the board, but I had responsibility to the board for making sure there was one, and a lot of the other admin functions, paying attention to governance and policy, things like that. So I did want to mention that I wasn't on the Fabulous Committee during this period, but I paid attention to it, and it really, in my role, was so important to be paying attention. Sometimes when you're, in this programming admin situation, you can be quite outside programming and some of the discussions at committee. So it's really important to pay attention at staff meetings, follow up from committee meetings to understand what was going on there, so I could make sure that what I was doing in admin was in sync with the initiatives that were coming forward through the Fabulous Committee. So I think that's a really important thing in admin. I'm just going to check my notes here.
Libby?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I know what you mean, but I just wanted to mention that we did collaborate in organizing the Mylène's articule.
Yeah.
Programming, I just didn't want to make it so clear cut.
Oh yeah, no, I was, in small organizations, we were a handful of staff. So for some of the people here today, the participants today, you might be in organizations that are quite a bit larger than Articule. And so there's, different arrangements. And certainly if you're in a very large organization, Sophie touched on this, like or Samuel actually talked about spending a year when the committee was formed, making sure people knew there was a committee doing this work. And in large organizations, that's important too. So, in Articule, yes, I was very connected, but I wasn't at that committee. And that was fine. I'm not saying it was a problem at all. It was fine. I participated in other ways. I also want to say that I've had over 25 years experience in not-for-profit management and admin. And before that, I was in human resources in a corporation. Big corporations have worked in collectives, different models. So for me, when I'm working and going into an organization, have a new job, I'm always bringing the commitment to doing the work, but also thinking about the social justice agenda that I carry in my life and in my work, and how I'm going to make that happen, and can I make it happen in the organization. And it was mentioned earlier, the ebb and flow of the waves. Sophie made me think of the ebb and flow of staff turnover in staff, in membership over the years. This ebb and flow requires a constant dialogue about who we are, how we work together. And the Basis of Unity document is wonderful for that, because it's not just 3 short lines, which you see in a lot of organizations, but these are our values. This is 5 words. This is a wonderful, these are the kinds of statements we need to really understand what we're trying to do when we talk about anti-oppression and what it means to work with that as a fundamental approach. I do want to thank Articule, particularly Aziza and Morial, for organizing and for inviting me to participate and for organizing this, with Ilan for hosting us It's really wonderful. I'm going to speak briefly on my perspective as an administrator and my experience at Articule, but also there's, I've worked at so many other organizations. The examples I'll share today aren't specific to Articule. They'll be familiar to those of you who have been working for a while or even for a short term. And before, I had a quote that I was going to end my 10 minutes with, but I'm going to start with it because Samuel and Sophie made me think that might be a good thing to do. Sean Wilson is a scholar, and I'm referring to a document from 2008. He did work on Indigenous research methods and has a text from 2008, Research is Ceremony. And this is the quote. We must ensure that both sides of in the relationship are sharing the power going into these new connections. Without this reciprocity, one side of the relationship may gain power and substance at the expense of the other. And I think that, Samuel and Sophie spoke so much about experiences that are related to that, and that we need to be thinking about. The context might be different, thinking about research practices and indigenizing research practices, but this captures a need in all of our organizations for ongoing anti-oppression work and to be thinking about power and how it functions. Okay, I have 4 sort of tips, food for thought, that I'd like to share through examples from my experience. And I'm going to start with a situation that is related to governance and anti-oppression and governance and decision-making at the board. It's already been touched on quite a bit today, but I was involved in a situation where there was a lengthy delay in decision-making. And it proved to be really critical in escalating a crisis that was already in the works. And when there's a crisis, you really need to stop and say, okay, what's going on here? Which Sophie talked about, and figure out what action to take to de-escalate, to resolve the problem. And the delay at the board went on for months. The board were not taking action, making a decision, because there was no policy or document with instructions on whether they could or could not take action, whether they had the authority to make a decision to require someone to leave the organization. And this went on for that's one factor in the ongoing lengthy delays, but this seemed to me, from my experience, a really critical part. They were stalled, they couldn't make a decision. And the impact on employees and board members as well. This months of back and forth between staff and board meetings, letters, emails, it was in effect a form of psychological harassment. It was it was awful. So this is something to, an experience that I won't forget, and wish I could have found a way to, we're always working to find ways to help boards make decisions and move on. They were really stuck, and the reason, really, they were prioritizing the lack of this explicit bylaw or the policy over the well-being and safety of the staff, of the employees, and other board members as well. But to prioritize that way, that is not an environment of care. When there's a crisis, the first thing should be, how are people being affected? How can we make sure people are okay through this difficult discussion? So I do have a little tip on that. And it's important to consider, who is making the decisions and for whom? How are they being made in their impact on everybody? And my tip, I don't know if the slides can come up as these about instant news, but really, if you have a chance to read the Basis of Unity document online from Articule, you'll see that it talks about having a toolkit of resources for the center for where you work. And so I really think that's so important, developing an organizational toolkit, but keeping it handy. Been at so many meetings where we're talking about an issue and someone's like, well, what does the human resources policy say? don't have it at hand. You know, I've been on boards of directors in a few places and okay, well, what's the bylaw say about, you know, quorum or whatever it might be? Sometimes it's very simple and we don't have it at hand. So I really encourage you all to develop a toolkit. It takes time, things take time, but bit by bit. And the key thing with the toolkit is to make sure that you use it in orientation sessions. And this is part of this ebb and flow of staff and members. You sit down together with your new board, with the new staff, you read the key documents with them, have a discussion about what they mean for the organization. And this kind of sharing can really be a way to ensure there's understanding, and understanding leads to care and consideration when difficult situations arise. You know, the conundrum with policy is, you have a crisis and you go, oh my God, we don't have a policy, or we don't have a process for mediation. So you do that work and get it done, and then another crisis comes up and it's completely different. So, it's a bit of a cycle, but the more tools you develop, the better off you are. And there's so many on the resources online that encourage you to have discussions and look at that. I'm going to talk really briefly about human resources. And this, all of this, whether you're working in a hierarchical or a non-hierarchical structure, we're talking about non-hierarchical practices. And I love that the ELAN notice of the event said non-hierarchical practices, because actually you could have a hierarchical structure. It might not be your number one priority to work to change that, but you can still use non-hierarchical practices. And I think that's really important. I'm going to use a really simple example for me of the need to address things before they become, mountains. So address little things before they become larger problems and develop into crises in your organization. So it does take an active, as Samuel was talking about, you have to be active in your engagement with the people you work with and the members that you engage with, artists, whomever. But I think of that, the little things, and my favorite, it's the wrong word, but an example is, a colleague has some work that they, are working on, and they need something from you, and they look at you and say, I'll need that by Thursday. And then you don't work on Tuesdays because you're part-time and you're not back, or don't work on Wednesdays, it's Tuesdays, and they want it by Thursday. And you're just sitting there going, well, why didn't this come up in our staff meeting last week? You've known about this project for ages. It can really raise frustration if it happens a lot. We all do it every once in a while. I'm not talking about the exception, but when things happen on an ongoing basis, you're like, what's going on? And so these are things to pay attention to in yourself. Why is that bothering me? What can I do to just bring forward and say, listen, we've got to sit down, we've got to work something out about this, because it's not okay. And when it happens over and over again, that's when you lose the idea of creating care in an organization. It means talking about little things before they become bigger problems. So all of that to say, what I'm, the big thing here is in human resources is to have position descriptions that clearly outline who does what, each person's roles and responsibilities, of course. But from my experience, even more important is to regularly review your position descriptions, like together, the various roles and responsibilities you share. And this can be, if you have a hierarchy, you have a team with a director, a manager, and frontline staff, you can do this together, because it's how you understand where your work overlaps with other people, the impact you have on each other's workload. It's so important, especially in small organizations, because we're all, you're in a way understaffed always. But that, you're always relying on someone else to help to get your work done. So those discussions are really important. So, position descriptions and this is my job is one thing, but really I encourage hierarchical or non-hierarchical to have discussions. And so my tip on that one is in human resources is you have to take time to work on how you work together. It's pretty simple. I'd like to share briefly a concept I've been working on recently, and I'm using the language of reciprocal accountability. And this is about finding ways to support each other through difficult conversations. So you can take that slide down. I don't need the slide up. But, accountability, it's a big word in all for lots of reasons in society, but in our workplaces, who's accountable to whom in the not-for-profit workplace. There are certain, formal processes in our work environments, performance reviews, reporting to our funders, reporting to the board. But to me, these are not really activities that deal with accountability. They are, you're sharing what you've done. But for me, the question of accountability is about people being responsible to other people and and how you work together. So the notion that people are responsible for what they do and say, for the work they carry out in an organization, and that if they do or say something that is inappropriate, because of course, it's always about, when things are great, they're great. But when there's something that's difficult, that's the moment to have some tools to help you. So if they do or say something that is inappropriate in the context of their workplace relations and workplace expectations, other people can hold you accountable, and should be able to hold you accountable. And I think this should apply in hierarchical organizations or non-hierarchical. It should be a non-hierarchical practice, reciprocal accountability. In many workplaces, there are people who have and continue to operate with impunity. And this experience is in every organization I've ever worked in. I've seen that. There's some people that are never taken to task about the things that they say or do. And this experience at Articule as well, at the board level, that, this idea that staff were challenged around a lot of things, but it was board that we really, Samuel alluded to it, like taking responsibility and acknowledging that they had to do some things that they weren't doing, or were doing things they shouldn't be doing. So people, this fact that so many people operate with impunity, this relates directly to supremacist beliefs and oppressive environments. And they contribute to full-blown crises. So it's really to avoid and to challenge, to avoid crises, but to challenge notions of impunity for some. So I really encourage processes that encourage dialogue and allow for feedback to colleagues as a regular part of your work, and to be doing it when things are going well, so that when there's a trouble, you're used to this kind of dialogue about how you're working together and what's working and what could be changed. When there's a problem, our tendency is to hope, and pray that the problem is just going to go away. It's like, and then 2 weeks go by, I haven't talked to them, 4 weeks go by, I still haven't talked to them about it. It's sitting there. So really, to encourage dialogue on a regular basis, so important. So, and, in the non-hierarchical workplace, of course, there's no one but ourselves to solve problems and to talk to each other about them. In a hierarchy, you might all think, oh, well, the manager's got to take care of that. That's their job, But really, it's in a non-hierarchical model, you really do have to have good relations and open discussion. So I've been working on, what can you say in job descriptions? So this is, related to human resources as well. What can you put into a job description that lets people understand their responsibility to other people in the organization, and around this responsibility to dialogue and support and care, and when things are difficult to be even more supportive. I was thinking about what could be an introductory section in a job description, where you might say something like, this horizontal structure in place at the center requires a shared accountability with reciprocal reporting in a variety of contexts, whatever, amongst employees, board employees, ad committees at the board. So reciprocal reporting, meaning, say you have a hierarchical model, you could use this. You report in, someone reports into the manager reports into the board. That's how we think about that model. but actually the manager could be reporting to staff as well. And you're going back and forth and giving feedback to each other in that reporting process with the board as well. And in job descriptions, you might actually have language about, offering this constructive feedback, supporting people through conversations when there's a vulnerability. You find the language that works for you, but to actually write it into job descriptions, I think would be very helpful. I'm just going to read this example. I think, imagine if your job description actually said, or your position description, be prepared to listen to and accept suggestions and constructive feedback from colleagues and members, and being open to different perspectives and different ways of doing things. Now, we talked, there was a mention before, it's just words, but actually, if these are important words, these documents, and they need to be talked about together and understood together. So I really encourage an orientation that, if you have a new job description, the board member is reading their job description and it talks like this, then they understand what they're getting into when they're starting in an organization, and this, expectations are set around communication. So, these documents are really, really important. And then my last point, I think that this is a tip that, is linked to everything. But how do you minimize conflict? How do you create care? So, we've touched briefly on some ways and thoughts about that. But for me, the main thing about having an environment that is healthy and safe for employees and members and visiting artists, whomever, is to have really good planning and to overestimate the amount of time and resources it will take to carry out your plans. And I'd just like to share this experience from Articule. Actually, Sophie and I started at the same time, so you'll remember this, Sophie. In the first year we were there together, we did 51 activities. So those of you who are here today that do reports to any of the arts councils know there's that grid where you list everything you've done. And when we submitted the report, I was speaking with Hélène Laroche at Calc, some of you may know her, and she said, wow, you guys did a lot of work this year. And I'm on the other end of the phone saying, way too much work this year. Like, this is how do you avoid burnout? You have to be, there's no time for the reflection, the discussion, the conversations that you need to have an anti-oppressive environment and to really support each other and be caring if you're boom, 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 working to ridiculous levels. So on whatever is on that list. So really plan to avoid burnout, say no to, I don't know, Sophie's laughing there somewhere, but I would always be sitting at my admin desk saying, okay, just say no to, say no. And I really say no. And even if you love the artists and their projects are fabulous, like, isn't it hard to make those decisions sometimes, right? And to say, we can't add another activity to our schedule this year. So important. And that's the only way you'll have time for so schedule in your time for reflection and discussion. And that to me is really critical if we want an environment that's anti-oppressive in our workplaces. I think that's all. So thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer questions later on.
Thank you, Libby. Fernando, we still have time to hear you on your experience in the committee, the Fabulous Committee, and as a member.
Yeah, so I'll just jump in. Like, how important it, just bringing a concept that Libby just brought, like this importance of prioritizing well-being and self-care, right? Because this is something this is a change that I witnessed has been part of the Fabulous Committee, right? So we were all like taking decisions, listening to everybody, and doing the festivals, the Monochrome, thinking about the how to write the basis of unity, approving things. And as people were participating in this committee, their issues were brought into the table as well, right? The way that they feel, or how things that they lived, things that they experienced. And with time, that was being welcomed in the comedy. And it started becoming like this place of, oh, let's heal ourselves first, right? Like, let's breathe, let's meditate, let's self-care in order for us to have like the energy to later make those decisions, right? To in our next moment, we start making those decisions. This was a change that I saw by witnessing in the fabulous comedy. So, and how important this is, right? Because marginalized people, marginalized communities are always pressured with things to do and to do more, or to prove more, or to add more. And then to link to something that Sophie was bringing in, that those existence has to be like nourished, right? And there is a different concept that has to be understood when we talk about resistance, right? Like, because resistance is always seen as like, oh, minorities is resisting to something. But something that Sophie brought in is that like this change, right? When we minorities are existing in our plenitudes, or when you're exploring our we are and the things that we have to say, and we have been giving a voice, it's them who's going to resist, right? It's them who's going to resist to our existence, to the things that we are building in. So you see, like, there's sometimes those concepts and those dynamics need to be inverted, right? You have to put yourself in the perspective of those who are the most marginalized, right? Because I don't know why some people will start, how to accommodate, right? If you bring those who are in the margins of the margins to the center of the discussion, everybody's profiting from. Right, to quote Bell Hooks, right, when she would say that when a Black woman gains positions of power, the whole society benefits from it. And this is true, right? So and there was a lot of conflicts and discussions in order to make those beautiful things happen, right? When we were speaking about, I say, oh, but articule for me was always a safe space. And people were like, what do you mean? It has been always a safe space? Because there was so much drama, there was so much conflict, there was so much things to resolve, and things to people to be held accountable, and et cetera, et cetera. But that for me, like, the fact that we could stop and think about those things and held things accountable and then discuss about it, and taking the time to do so and putting the labor to do so, that's for me a safe space. That's for me a definition of a safe space, because I can go there and I know that things is going to be addressed. There's not going to be a taboo, the taboo is there to be removed. Or, at some point I only saw things being addressed. I'm sorry, someone else says that at some point the taboos were there, but I only saw like that opening of the taboos, the Pandora box being open, and people being like super, like energized and have to, furious sometimes. And I was just like, I was enjoying this chaos, because I felt home. I was like, okay, so this is the place. Like, this is the place where I want to be. No, those places like where those conflicts are not, we're going to, no, not much of conflict. No, I don't want to go there. Or, because we are learning how to navigate those things, right? And if we don't do it together, what it is, we're going to put it under the sofa, or it's going to be put it on the budget to resolve with the tokenism, right? Which I have seen in other institutions, artist institutions that are so-called for the minorities, but they have, to be held accountable at certain degrees by things, but how they manifest their things, right? So why not giving those, looking at those who are in the margins of the margins is so important. Right, and let them, giving them the time and space to speak and to heal first, and then so you can profit from their labors after, right? Because when and this is the mode that we are in now, right? We arrived at that mode of healing, of taking the time. Well, myself, I'm always like this. So it's like we're gonna breathe now, Fernando. We're gonna we're gonna come with the decisions. So this is the mode, or the mood of the fabulous comedy at this moment, right? With some amazing people who are there and working to this happen. And it's very important for people to become members of the center, to come bring to these discussions. Because what I also saw in the Fabulous Comedy is that people will come and go, right? So when we were editing the basis of unity, some people will put something on the document, another person will come with another opinion. And it was so open in that sense that allowed people to come and go. So sometimes I will go to the meeting, I was like, what are you talking about? I'm not really understanding any of this. But then when it will come up something, like I will be able to bring an idea and people are like, wow, yeah, that's an interesting idea. You know, that's like a rhizomatic thing, you know, where you can bring different points and they will have convergences of these points. And the way it was organized, it allowed that. It allowed for a stranger to come in and be welcomed. And then later on, you know, listen, right? It's very important for us, if we want to be empathic, to listen to what's going on. You know, if you are called out, if you are in that side of the team, which would say something that you shouldn't say, or who address something that you shouldn't address, and then you swallow dry, why don't you take a minute and say, why are you swallowing dry? Why is that inconvenience getting into you, right? Why is it getting into you? Think about it. Think about it, why you've been called on, right? Let personal change take over you. And we all, I feel like at Articule, we all have a little bit of that connection, okay? Let's let that change come in. Right? Let's address it. I only saw beautiful things, right? Like sitting as a member and in the board, like I'm profiting from the works of Libby. I'm profiting from the works of Sophie and Samuel, right? So because you're a member, you're there for the exhibitions, you're participating as well on the discussions, you're listening, you're witnessing all those issues. But you're in a different position, right? Because you're not giving it labor that way. It's a volunteer labor. Right? So it's a different dimension, but your contribution is as important, because those issues come to be approved in those committees. It come to be listened to, right? And sometimes your opinions will be valid, sometimes you won't, sometimes you will be called out on it, and etc. But it's all that process together coming into bringing things to Articule. I have only good things to talk about, and I've never seen this in other institutions that I did free labor for, or that I worked, and I don't know, is that spirit. I don't believe in God, so spirit, but it's like this thing, you know, this polarization of interesting things. And yeah, so I was around Articule. I jumped into Articule like by confusion, like Samuel and Sophie. I went to an exhibition which was about an artist who were making shoes like with indexes of animals, so like copying the paws of the animals, and then you will walk. The members and the public was invited to walk on the snow and leave indexes of animals in the city. And I was there to look at the exhibition and look at the photographs and the results of what came out of the art, because this is what interested me, the art and the food, because there was always food. And then somebody said, you know, we're having a general assembly here, and we cannot start it if you don't join in. And me, I was like, General Assembly, what is that? You know, like. And then, so like, yeah, I was like, well, okay, so where is it? Where is the General Assembly? Oh, it's in that corner. And then I went to the corner. Everybody was piled up in a small room. And then it's supposed to be sitting there and participating. And then everybody was just waiting for that person of the gallery to come in, because they couldn't start it if I wasn't sitting there. So when I got there, everybody looks at me like, who is this person? And I was like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't think I want to be here. And then I left. So from 2012 until 2016, I was this person who was going to Articule, to the galleries, to the food, and etc., and participating on, but not being a member, not being like, and people are like, why is he not a member? Or, you know, And then in 2015, I did an exhibition, participated in an exhibition with Priya, where I met Kimura. And from there, I eventually became a member, and I went through the membership process, right? And then I was put into the Fabulous Committee right away. So I got there from 15. I was listening to the gossips of what will happen around before, but then I get there into 16, 17, and then I will see like the work, like I say, like what Sophie and Coco and other people come up, who do an excellent job in there, and who are always taking care of making sure that for us, or for people of color, people from other countries, immigrants, people with different abilities, de la divergence capacitaire, or for people of color in general, trans communities, queer communities, you name it, all those who are in the margin some way, somehow. It was only resembled to me as a safe space. Of course, that I will listen to a little bit of what was going on behind the stage, and with time, with involvement, it becomes more and more clear to me how is that process of working, what Libby was saying, right? Within a hierarchical structure, but trying to de-hierarchize, inventing a word, trying to like make more fluid and to spread out, make it horizontal in that process. It is difficult, right? Sometimes it was I wouldn't understand. I would come to the Fabulous Committee, and it would be like so much time dedicated to one thing, and it would be like, this is not efficient at all. Why does people move on, you know? But people think, oh, on va ralentir, or we're gonna slow down. It's not about that. It's about putting a lot of effort, a lot of labor into that process, and it was stretching time. But it's not a time that you're doing nothing. You are putting a lot of labor into that. You know, you're listening to many different points of view, addressing everybody who is in the room. The time it takes for that, you know, and what institution really does that? To what purpose? To benefit who? You know, those questions. And for us, it was always like, you know, now, and for me, I want to see things going on, but calm down, Fern. We're gonna listen now. We're gonna use our senses, you know, and make this horizontal. Listen to what other people have to say. You know, empathy. Always building empathy. There's always ethics into it. Not that ethics of those philosophers who were supposed to be in the grave a long time ago, but the ethics of, you know, being together and being humans, right? Like watching for your human, being able to put yourself in the resilience of all the people who have participated into this all throughout the years is like priceless. The amount of negativity that these people were able to transform into something positive, and to bring and to pass this into the different positions and different labors and etc. is just like, for me, I fall in love with this. Like I want to be an articule. You know, I feel welcome in there. And I hope that others will have that feeling as well, you know, because we need that. We need more of that change, you know. And if articule is an avant-garde in that process, I believe so. I don't like this thing of garde, you know, like sounds like military, but being in the front of this, you know, and bringing these discussions in it, it's just so good to welcome that change into your persona. And I don't understand why it's so difficult for, I mean, you all do the labor, right? Like the major labor, but it has to hold things accountable, you know, because I don't know, like it's very complex for us to navigate the art scenes. You know, it's very complex when they take our money. The money is supposed to be ours, you know, because there are always mediators who is going to come and make that mediation. So can we think about less mediation and more artists taking on to the positions? Can we do that? Or you're always going to have to be a mediator to talk about what marginalization is? Why don't you let the marginal say what marginalization is, like Sophie was talking about? There is many things, there is many layers of things to be discussed. And then I love this concept of Libby, reciprocal accountability. It's reciprocal, it's together, my friend. It's together. It's not you there with your artist ego, it's just diluting that artist ego. Let's bring a cause to the forefront, please. Let's bring a cause, because there was no cause. Let's bring a cause, right? I'm talking about in general, those art institutions with a racist approach, you know? And as soon as we start talking about white and whiteness, it becomes this thing, right? That, Sometimes I was in an institution where we are with an artist, and the artist was like, you know, I'm a mediator, I'm a cultural mediator sometimes. And the artist was like, oh, but I want my mediation public to be specifically, you know, North American, and make that, you know, a epistemological framing, or, you know, like white and this and that and then privilege, etc. Like minorities can be put in a box so many times, right? But whiteness could not be put into that box. But then when we speak about whiteness, we surpass the color of the skin. We're not talking about the color of skin anymore. We're talking about colonization, and the tree that Coco has in there shows that clearly. When we're saying whiteness, it's not about the color of your skin, my friend. It's not only that. It's about colonialism. It's about cis heteronormativity. It's about hierarchical procedures. It's about where privileges have been and continue to be. It's about that director position who stayed there for 10 years and doesn't leave. You know, it's about all those things that is embedded into whiteness. And unfortunately, we have to use that word. And why not taking on the charge of race for a second, for a change? Because our peers, our Black folks, have to deal with that charge for decades, right? For hundreds of years. So why not us, white people, can to a point take on that charge of race, right? And dégagé and a little bit more loose for them, and think about like what whiteness means in terms of race until a social construct, because scientists have proved that we are all equal genetically, right? Eugenie it's just a bullshit. But so if you're going to embark into the social construct, what is whiteness think? Why whiteness cannot take into the charge of race? So there's those questions, right, that we have to put out there, and we have to push. We have to push. This is about existence, because otherwise we are erased. You can erase us. We're going to continue to make art, whether with your money or without your money. We're going to continue to do it. Whether if art means putting us together and eating something, which article we always had food, always have vegetarian food, you know. So like this is the interesting thing about it. I don't see this in other centers. I don't see this in other institutions. And like so many other things. So you can open like those last minutes to enjoy, you know, like to talk about, to bring a concept, because I can only talk good things about it. Like this is a real safe space for me. We're gonna address things, you know. It's a place where we address. Like didn't we all supposed to address?
And I wanted to leave some time for our audience to actually address or ask us some questions. We have only a couple of minutes left, so if anyone wants to write directly the questions in the chat, please do so. We'll take a couple of minutes. And yeah, I really want to thank you, Fern. You really touched to the core of our engagement and work towards these preventative measures, and also the feeling of community that we have to maintain and care for, to really have these spaces of discussion and these spaces where resistance can break down towards like making change, making long-lasting change that won't be forgotten or taken for granted through the years. So if anyone has a question, I would really welcome you to write it in the chat. And yeah. And if the speakers have other questions, let me know.
I was going to say we can also let people unmute if they feel more comfortable asking it. I mean, at this point, by all means. But I suppose while people are perhaps formulating their questions, Aziza, is there a way, an ideal way for people that they can get in touch with you and the Articule team if they have thoughts that come to them later? What's the best way of getting in touch?
Absolutely. Well, we have our website, which has all the documents we mentioned before and the policies as well. There's a lot of transparency on these texts. So if you want to read them and get to know them better, or maybe get a sense of what the basis of unity means for us, you can go on articule.org, or you can contact me directly at outreach@articule.org, and it'll be my pleasure to answer you. Yes, we definitely feel the change as a new team. We're all very new to Articule and started at the same time, and mostly racialized, no, 100% racialized people. So this is a big change for me personally. This is the first time that I feel it happening, and I can already see how much these spaces for discussions are maintained and really cared for. And we only want to find the capacity in the next years to really try to build onto the spaces and make it even bigger, and not let people burn out on it. So yeah, it's a big change, and it's positive change coming for Articule. Yeah. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Francisco, for helping me facilitate this video. I really appreciate it. I would suggest, if you want to learn more about these changes or the different committees and how they work, please email us with any questions, or you can email also Ilan to find other resources through their Québec Relations project. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for this wonderful talk. I learned myself a lot, so I really appreciate it. Have a great evening. Goodbye.
Thank you, Aziza. Thank
you so much to everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, big thank you from Milan for everyone who spoke. This was great.
Thank you.